Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh, hey,
Oh, you are
hey, Molly.
recording. Are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
Well, good evening. For those of you that are on the other side of the pond as our presenter today, good afternoon and good morning to all participants of Balkan Circle. My name is Kirill Avramov, and I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies, and I'm part of the Center of Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm glad to have the new iteration of the season of Balkan Circle when we had a number of interesting topics. Today, we will be talking about Albania, and I would like to ask my co-host, Professor Miri Newberger, to introduce herself and the guest today with this very interesting topic that we'll be talking about, legitimization and delegitimization of terror. Professor Newberger.
I apologize for not asking in advance, but is this a correct pronunciation of your last name, Pandelejmoni?
Yeah, right. That's correct.
Okay. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Enriketa Pandelejmoni Papa, who's an Albanian historian and associate professor in the Department of History at the University of Tirana. She has a PhD in history from the University of Graz in Austria, and her main research interests include modern history, communism, and memory, the focus on Albania. She is an author, or she's the author of the monograph Shkodra, Family and Urban Life 1918 to 1939, which came out in 2019, and also the co-author of numerous edited volumes, including History of Communism in Albania through the Archives, Myths and Mythical Spaces, Conditions and Challenges for History Textbooks in Albania and Southeastern Europe, The Call for Freedom, Studies on Totalitarianism and Transition in Albania, and Albania, Family, Society, and Culture in the 20th Century. She's also the author of numerous articles and academic papers published in different journals in Albania and abroad. She teaches courses such as History and Memory, Society and Culture in Communist Albania, and Transitional Justice and History. So thank you so much for being here, Enriketa, and we're excited to hear your talk today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I feel really, honored actually to be here, and I would like to thank all the staff of the center, you, Professor Neuburger, you, Professor Avramov, and Molly, and the other people that I have exchanged emails all this time. I'm really honored to be here to talk on some controversies on TJ, transitional justice, and communist past in Albania today, I would say, about legitimization and legitimization of terror, as I have entitled my presentation, related mostly to a case study that is really in the focus of some of research that I am conducting recently. I would like to share my screen if let me, yeah, I don't know, do you see it? Do you see it now? Yeah, I do. Yeah, and actually I like very much the poster of my presentation that you have prepared for today, which is exactly the photo that I have also used for this presentation, and it's the toppling of the former communist dictator of Albania, Enver Hoxha, who ruled the country in I would say, in a Stalinist way of ruling. A dictatorship. Albania was a dictatorship from the end of the World War II, 1945, till the death of Enver Hoxha, and then he was followed by his successor for another 6 years. So from 1945 till 1991, Albania was in a really Stalinist dictatorship, and here you see his statue in the center of the capital of Albania, Tirana, which was toppled in a kind of civil revolt of the citizens of Tirana, but also people coming from all over the country. in Tirana in February 1991, and here is his lacking statue, I would say, after the toppling, and I like very much this picture to say a kind of and I show it also to my students when talking on TJ and on communism in Albania. It's kind of a picture full of colors in sign of hope, let's say, so for the freedom. It's a kind of call for freedom, as me and my colleagues call it in a publication that you mentioned, a call for freedom in Albania after the ruthless dictatorship. What about the dictatorship? Actually, we are in the 30 years that the communist regime collapsed in Albania, and still communism still presents itself as the most polarizing topics actually nowadays in Albania. And in regard to the politics of memory and the seek for justice for the human violations is challenged by the efforts, this politics of memory is challenged by the efforts of the victims of communism to advocate the legal and historical investigation of communist rule. And in the same time, by the perpetrators' denialism and idealization of communist time. Actually, especially after 2015 in Albania, there has been actually a boom, I would say, on TJ and memory studies. Numerous studies are expressed actually in memoryscape, in monuments, memorials, work of arts, and as well as in school teaching textbooks. But the return of this memory, of the memory per se, has taken place on multiple levels, I would say, in the society. But nevertheless, this nature of a pluralist liberty society after the collapse of the fall of communism in 1991, itself presuppose different interpretation of the past, sometimes very controversial, sometimes very contradictory, I would say. And in Albania, the research on communism and of the memory of it, still after 30 years of the fall of communism, is in its beginning, and yet in the recent years, as I said, is flourishing. The studies on communism and on the memory of communism are produced mostly of public investigating and research centers, of NGOs, and recently some monographs and memoirs and oral history also of former political prisoners are published. Today, as witness to the tragic events of communism are passing away, politicians, historians, and representatives of associations or NGOs are struggling for reconstruction of the social memory of communism. This finds its expression in commemorative arcs, in memorials, private initiatives also. And the public discourse and important debates demonstrate the change in the social consciousness relating to the past events, and the official policies of history must tackle this difficult task of strengthening the national identity, I would say also, for the normative formation of a new directed democracy, and establishing also the elements of a transitional event and memory like communism. But how lived experiences of people are inflected by present-day political and social exigencies in regard to the public memory of the communist past? How is the past represented in media, in public sphere, in commemorative events, or in the museums or memorials in Albania? So I would say that in the path of Europeanization and in the integration of in the EU, that post-communist Albania has to follow, it's expected that Albania should apply actually the European transnational perspective of the politics of communist memory. European Union, induces and encourages an ideal situation in which the memory of communism will be acknowledged equally to that of the Holocaust. For example, In this perspective, the political structure of the European actors aiming at criminalizing communism is theorized as a rightful attempt that calls for recognition of the value of the distinctly East European experiences or experience that has not been universally shared in Europe. The basic for this recognition-seeking campaign is that all victims of the past injustice deserve equal respect, irrespective of the causes of their suffering. But as Zambori, for example, in his study rightly points out, the EU politics of recognition has two unreflective features. The first is a direct causal link between history and politics. The past determines regional differences, which automatically call for public recognition. Seeking reconciliation between competing visions of history, the thesis of politics of recognition mistakes the memory claims of the actors for history. The second unreflective feature concerns the Eastern nature of communism, an experience directly known only in the Soviet member countries or states and satellite countries as Albania was at the time. In this view, the memory of communism in its currently canonized form is the outcome of the bottom-up process through which the Eastern experience of Europe has finally been acknowledged, or partly acknowledged, aside the founding experience of the Holocaust. And Charles Meyer, is the American historian Charles Meyer, has written, for example, in his speech in the IAWM in Vienna on hot and cold memory, referring to Nazis and to communist memories, Holocaust memory and communism and communist memory. And this, for me, I would say that this is the exactly cold memory of communism that we are actually experiencing in Albania, where from the point of some intellectuals, communism or socialism, as some of them call, is considered mild, mellow, because it's not enough studied, and because to many of the former communists evidence lack of concept of shame and personal regret, the perpetrators toward their victims and their acts during communism. Thus, nostalgia of communism past is very present today, and I'm not wondering that some of the publications and some of the public reaction in Albania or in the discourse of communism, communist past or TJ, are still trending nowadays in our country, in Albania. So this communist discourse and the ways how Albanians recall their communist past has been very controversial and polarized. One of the main targets of those who reject the notion of a criminal communist past or regime and the efforts to commemorate the victims of the dictator Enver Hoxha's repressive policies is, for example, a public institute established under the authority of the Albanian Parliament, the Institute for the Study of Communist Crimes and Communist Consequences in Albania, ISKK, with its research and commemorative activities. One of the latest victims or casualty, I would say, of the fight, of the struggle on legitimization and versus delegitimization of the communist past in Albania was the former director, actually, of this institute, ISKK, Agron Tufa, who actually is a renowned writer, a translator, an international recognized writer, who had publicly in Albania denounced former secret police Sigurimi officers to be still active in the state administration, in the state public administration, and called for stricter lustration measures and decommunization of the Albanian society. So he continuously asked, for example, for the ban of the communist symbols, which were recently reappearing in the public events in Albania. And which I call the relativization approach toward the communist past and its crimes, especially arise in 2018, provoked by a debate, a TV debate streamed on an Albanian TV show, which I'm showing you the screenshot from that debate. For example, in March and during the March-April 2018, the Albanian historian and medievalist Palum Gjufi, on the right side of the screen, reopened actually the debate of communist period and on the communist past, and on the sides of memory due to his statements on the conditions in the barbed wire camp of Tepellena. Tepellena was used as a barbed wire camp during the 1949 till 1953-55. And there were interned and were deported the families of people who escaped communist Albania after the war, and mostly of their family of the people who escaped Albania or were arrested or were imprisoned or were executed were deported to this camp. And the camp in this camp were such families with elderly kids and wives of the person that I have mentioned. So on March 28th, 2019, in the evening show of Arena, streamed through a local channel Ora News, in a discussion on the historic objectivity on communism, the historian Gjufi claimed that the comparison of the camp of Tepellena with the Shoah, Holocaust, is terrible and banal. He claimed that Enver Hoxha, the dictator, killed Albanian just as de Gaulle, for example, in France, killed 2,000 Frenchmen. While 4 days later, still the historian, in arguing on the condition of the Tepellena camp with Agron Tufa, who were the director of ISKK, this institute, stated in another TV evening show that the conditions in the camp of Tepellena were not so bad in comparison to the rest of Albania at the time of the 1949. In a daily newspaper, the historian deepened his arguments and critics on those scholars and public institutions in Albania who were challenging, according to him, the narrative of communism in Albania by basing the findings on memory and oral history only. To him, the historic fact is based only on archival documents, which show no evidence that this camp, this barbed wire camp, was a death camp, and there is thus no comparison to Auschwitz. So the Nazi concentration camps as Auschwitz, Mauthausen, and Birkenau, for example, have no comparison in cruelty to any camp in Albania or anywhere in Europe, according to him. Considering that, according to him, any comparison to other repressive realities, as in the case of Tepellena camp, with the above-mentioned death camps of the Nazi, was or is anti-historic and speculative. Furthermore, in the nowadays project from the Ministry of Culture in Albania and other public institutions on the bringing to light the suffering and terror of Tepellena camp, this historian Gjufi sees an attempt actually to review the historic narrative on the Second World War in rehabilitating Albanian politicians who collaborated with the fascists or with the Nazis. Second World War in Albania is another hot potato, as I would say, in the historic public discourse or in the historic debates in nowadays Albania, in dividing the country and the scholars mostly, and the scholars in two camps, one defending the war of anti-fascist war and one accusing the politicians who collaborate, who were part also in this war as collaborator or as collaborators. So both communism and the World War II in Albania are really affecting the, I would say, the public life and the intellectual discourse on the past of the country. So this hot topic, this Second World War still is also influencing and is a kind of hegemonic, I would say, discourse of the Albanian histories in our day. But as I said, both World War II and the communist past are most discussed and contested topics in also in the public history and memory in Albania. The historian, the Professor Jufi, continuously argued that the conditions in the camp of Tepellena, in comparison to the conditions of the country at the time of the 50s and 60s, were not so bad, and no way Tepellena Barbed war camp could not be compared to Auschwitz, as the victims of communism in Albania or the associations of former political prisoners and many time witnesses of this camp pretend to be the Albanian Auschwitz. Thus, these statements follow up by several Jufi's journal articles, interviews, where he developed his hypothesis of a fake collective suffering during the first years of the communist period in Albania, and his convictions that the former political prisoners and their representatives exaggerate their pretending on comparing their trauma and terror with that of Nazi upon the Jews during the Second World War. Following up his arguments, he asserted that in Albania exist other sites of terror which, according to him, have more significance than Tepellena Barbed war camp. As the prison, for example, of Spac, Burel, as the prison of Spac and Burel, both prisons in North Albania. Whilst Tepellena was just a camp for the families of anti-communist individuals or war collaborators, mostly from North Albania, who were imprisoned or were in exile, as the familiars of some Albanians who through CIA were trained to throw the communists from power. So Jufi's comparison of terror size by pretending that there was a hierarchy of evil in communist Albania provoked many voices in Albania. A fervent objection came from the director, as I mentioned, of the ISKK, who reacted by publishing many testimonials of former victims or former inhabitants of the war camp of Tepellena, and showing documents from the time. Tufa was on the left side. Tufa was very active in objecting Jufi's argument by arguing that the historian statements were false. For Tufa, from the testimonies of people who survived Tepellena, the reality doesn't seem that rose as Jufi asserted. Tepellena war camp could be compared to Auschwitz, with the difference that in Tepellena were no gas chambers and no crematoriums, but the rest was very comparable to Auschwitz conditions. The life in camp was unbearable, with 460 children camped there with their mothers and grandparents from 1945. But what was the history, short history of the camp and on the Countess' memory of it? Immediately after communist seized power in Albania, as I said, after the World War II, 1945, many political opponents and the so-called war criminals were arrested, brutally investigated and put in prisons, and their families in concentration camps or barber camps spread all over the country. These camps were opened in March 1945 and closed in December 1953 with a decree from the presidium of the parliament of that time. Tepellena Barbed camp, known as the camp number 4 and later 6, was opened actually in 1949 and it closed in 1953. Was located near the. I have a map. I forget to put the map. No, here's a map. So Tepellena is somewhere here, and here's the map of camps and prisons in communist Albania. So this camp was located near the town of Tepellena in southern Albania, and its population consisted mostly of elderly people, women with small children. The camp contained a wide variety a wide variety of some villages around the city or the town of Tepellena as Turan, Memaliai, Velichoti, Bunch, Luzat, where prisoners work in the woods, mine, and mountains. Beside holding the families of the state enemies in this camp, another purpose of establishing this barbed camp was economic, by exploiting camps' populations, even small children, for economic purposes. This is there in Albania. There is no official figure on the number of the population, but the figures circulate between 1,400 till 2,500. All housed in 6 former fascist Italian military bases. Actually, we in Albania, we don't have any camp plan still yet, officially camp plan, but we have the Institute of Agran Tufa, the former director, has managed to publish some drawings from Leg Previsi, who was in this camp with his family, deported and in this labor camp, and all his drawings are publishing and showing to us the life, how the life was in the camp. But from the survivors of the camp, witnesses, came out stories of horror and sadness, with as many of 300 children who have lost their life in the camp due to illness, starvation, lack of hygiene. The ISKK in Tirana published many studies and memoirs with interviews, testimonies with former Tepellena's prisoners, all describing the miserable camp life and the huge number of deaths. Especially heartbreaking are the stories, for example, of mothers losing their children. Reading their stories, watching their interviews, one gets the impression that Tepellena was not a place for humans. Prisoners were treated as cattle, and in the sense of Applebaum's gulag, as I can say, they were just exploited or reified and commodified. Unless they were productive, their lives were worthless in their masters. The life in Tepellena barbed camp became publicly known today mostly from the witnesses' accounts published by the ISKK, and recently after the TV debate on the 2018. And on the notes, in quotation marks, no so bad conditions of the camp that the historian said. Recently, there are some attempts from since 2015 established recently, from 2015, from the establishment of the authority on the access and the information of the former state security service called Sigurimi. In Albania, there are attempts to open the secret police Sigurimi files. And also there is a project from this 2015 authority to turn Tepellena into a museum, to erase a memorial there, the National Memorial on Forced Labor Camp of Tepellena, and to turn Tepellena camp into a complex of the Museum of the Forced Labor Camps of the Communist Dictatorship in Albania. And to restore further a barrack there, to build a barrack there, because from what you see is this view are showing on the right, are showing the former barracks of the camp of Tepellena and the nowadays situation of the camp, which is ruins and only empty ruined buildings. So on August 23rd, which is the European Day of the Remembrance for victims of Stalinism and Nazism, since some years the authority and the former political prisoners associated and other NGOs active in Albania organize each 23rd of August several memorial or commemorative events to mark this day. But the main project on building a museum of communist crimes and the setting up of a memorial of Tepellena was followed by the opening of the exhibition by the authority of the opening of the secret police files, featuring the abandoned military barracks, as I'm showing you, in honor of the victims. Follow up this exhibition by other meetings at Tepellena campsite with the country's presidents attending the ceremony, and the decoration of the former camp's inhabitants were given. And also religious memorial services were held. But these plans of the authority were held actually on the summer of 2018 from the Ministry of Culture, which authorized the Institute for the Cultural Monuments in Albania, Public Institute, to issue an order to protect the site of the campsite of Tepellena by declaring it the former internment camp of Tepellena under a temporary protection. So any plan, any project was on hold due to a re-examination of the plans of the projects, but not only from the authority, but by other also institutions who are dealing with the memory, who are dealing with the communist crimes, to come together and to discuss firmer plans. But what about the discourse on communist past and the public debate on the communists and the former director of the ICKK? Because it's very interesting that although 30 years have passed after the collapse of communism in Albania, as I mentioned, the discourse of communism is really a hot potato. And the topic is very controversial also. And many feelings are involved in polarizing this period. The director of the Institute actually on December 2019 has announced through an official letter that he and his family has sought political asylum in Switzerland after many threats due to his work and duty, especially in the last years. The director Mr. Tufa, received death threats. He pretended to receive actually death threats through social networks as Facebook in autumn 2019, and his family was several times stalked during the 2019, the kids of him, due to his work and as the head of this institute in investigating the communist crimes and the study of the communist past. And due to his duty and due to his statements in denouncing the former secret police officers, been still active in the public administration and asking for a decommunization of Albanian society, condemning of the communist symbols, which are still allowed to be publicly demonstrated, and were actually reappearing in the public events in Albania as the pictures of the former dictator, the 5 stars, the Communist Party symbols. So the showing in the boulevard of Tirana and the main boulevard of the capital, the portrait of the partisan, and wishing out all the portraits of the other right-wing fighters were really criticized, forcefully criticized, fervently also criticized by Tufa. And all this public showing of the symbols of communism and of the perpetrators also in the public debates and in the streets of Tirana with holding the photographs of the dictator was, according to him, an act of hypocrisy toward the victims of communism in Albania. So he also tried to seek help from several foreign representatives or embassies in Albania. His live threats actually were ignored by the foreign representatives, who several times, I would say, do not understand very much the local reality and used to distance themselves from the local troubles. In an interview after seeking the asylum in Switzerland, Tufa stated that from 2017, when he opened actually a trial against an Albanian MP, member of the parliament, diplomats, former diplomats, journalists, and newsrooms, he was threatened with former state security officers. He launched a detail on the beginning of the 2019. He launched a detailed 16-page English language information on the 10 most accredited embassies in Tirana, including the EU, OSCE presence in Albania, as European representatives, but a claim that no one helped or responded back. In the absence of any help or protection from law enforcement agencies, independent institutions, human rights NGOs, human rights institutions, he was left without any other alternatives to save his life, his family, by fleeing and seeking political asylum. A last quote from him was, I think, and I'm quoting him, I think even animals, when they feel their cubs are in danger, abandon their territory, looking for another safer place to stay. So it seems that although these 30 years have passed since the communists disintegrated in Albania, and many scholars have documented numerous communist atrocities, the communist period remains a hot potato, as I said, in the public and in the political also discourse. Many in Albania remain unaware of the enormous scale of violation of human rights during the period. And in the last years, communism has begun to attract a consideration of voices for a revision of the communist atrocities are on rise, as well the nostalgic feelings. I'll give you an example. In 2016, the OSCE presence in Albania presented a survey about how Albanians see the communist past of their country, and on what they know about the former regime and how they deal with its legacy, revealed ambiguous perception on what was communism in Albania. The result of the survey, based on around 1,000 people of different ages, gender, education, geographic location of residence, political status, as a formerly persecuted or imprisoned person, revealed a divergent perception and knowledge about communism. The results showed that almost half of the population surveyed have a positive perception of communism in Albania, due to a nostalgic view of the past. Most of them also did not see the legacy of Albania's communist past as a present problem for the country. On the other hand, the survey results showed a lack of knowledge of the former regime among young people, and a lack of interest in learning more about it in general. So this survey revealed that 42% of Albanians believe Stalinist dictator Enver Hoxha had a positive impact on history, not much less than 45% who see him as a negative. So 42 seeing him as a positive, with a positive impact on the history of Albania, and 45 as a negative, as having a negative impact. So from this survey findings, I can conclude that the perpetrators are very nostalgic of their past, while the victims are very traumatized, and still are looking for justice to be implemented in a society, in a need for a transitional justice. The young generation is faced with amnesia, as many former political prisoners are dying off. Their voices are decreasing. Their early 90s optimism on reparation, restoration, justice, the tools of the tools mechanism of the TJ are vanishing. And those born in post-communist Albania have not enough information from school curricula in which communism is really scarce manifested, or are just careless of communism, or what was communism about in their country. So also the daily life, stressful routine, the economic, the social trouble have affected the ways how people perceive communism, and the pandemic also. So nostalgia and amnesia, as well the revision of communism, are characterizing the path from transition to democracy as are, for example, the demands of former political oppressed people for its condemnation of communist atrocities on implementation of the transitional justice. And I would say that because of this complex nature of memory within the debate around coming to terms with the past, one feels the sensitivity of this process, In Albania, the memorial contraposition between victims and perpetrators has remained a deadlock in an internal confrontation and reciprocal accusation of past contiguity with the regime. And because of these overreaching situations, for many years, proposing any kind of reflection on the memory of the regime was highly controversial, as it was clear that there was no room for a negotiation, any conciliatory middle range. I would show you, do I have time to show a 10 minutes video in considering, in showing the wire camp of Tepellena from the perspective of the victims?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. And, this is in Albania, but there are subtitles in English. I'm sorry for the Albanian, we don't have any English, but the subtitles are in
No,
English.
that would be fascinating to see. Thank you.
All right.
You might want to do full screen. Okay.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Just full screen, please.
Antitepelenska që në tetit mesh. Nuk mund të përshkruhet të belet. Ka burë që e përshkruhet.
Ky kamp ka një krahasim me pauzën që kam çfarosi.
Vetë s'kan qenë burrat në të duhet të blu.
Në pranverë vjen një urdhër për të transferuar për në Tepellena.
29-ën, ato si t'jenë të mëne t'i bashkoj, dhe të përqendroj Nika.
Ishin 7-8 makina. 2 polici ishin para makinës, 2 ishin sipër makinë.
Në që unë të kazermat është kalas të Tepelenës.
E kazermat e italianëve që janë të sot e kësaj dite.
Aty filloi pastaj smerri i vërtet.
Fillonte kazerma 1, kazerma 2, kazerma 3, kazerma 4, të gjitha këto të mundta.
Ishin kazermat të mëdha, me shtretër poshtë nga, gazeja, ishin të pesë.
Kazerma 5, që e marrë për ekonominë tim se tega meshve, 6 shërbeti si morë.
Ishte një gazerëm e bombardume, paqat i paqja, aty ishin qezmet, mrapa ishin banjat.
Ne s'kishim as plaçka, as të veshme, të bathme, kishim një pala, po t'i pasa për të ndruar, një argan, apo ashtu sa për mbulur dhe të 10 vjeqër finin bashkë.
Letër e gjashtë e gjanë. Pa që kanë të shime, pa të veta. Në që rrumë në kaj. Asë nuk lëvizë nga vene mësë, të për plasë që me një këtë.
Po të kaloj për dalë jashta, duhet të shkelje mbi njerës. Po vdise të ku atje, rrinë të gjithë natën. Të kreshin këto plakat tona, edhe rrinin deri sa jep të shpirt. Në pesën mëngjesit të t'ishin në kam.
Në shtë dalë në petë, në ka një për një gjesë. Në qitë në vënë të dënërsh.
Në qofë se në një vonoj, a i do hiqi zbarë dhe veshqerda. bëj apeli punëtorëve që shkonin në punë dhe mbeteshin vetëm to pa aftët dhe me fëmijët.
Nga 15 vjeç e lart, duhet të shkoshin për çfarë? Po kafshë, në parë, të kurrim.
Kemi mbajtë shtylla, kur temperatura ka qenë 10-9 Gratë grup njoma të përshën një gjysë në profitu në skrit. E për i thoshën në jerë policin, mos në venë masës në në bajtë, qëtë një matë krashë të me në pesitër.
Nuk kishin të merrin një aspirin diku dhe as ty të afrohin në një ndim mjekësore. Aty gjetëm një infirmeri që kishin pas bojë italianët, kishte 17-18 shtretër. Një banje përdorën për morg, kjo banje ishte shumë e vogël, kur vdishin ma shumë se dy ne i vishim njëri mbi tjetrin. Uria nuk të lente një minutë të qenë. Ishe moka i të torturoshe e mund të adoroje, Uria ishte mërshme, Uria nuk doroje. Ne si të vegjël quheshim ordiner dhe mërshim vetëm 400 gram bukë nisëri. As një gjë tjetër.
Atje buka ishte gjaja shenjë. Ai tjetri ka vdekur duke thirrur bukë.
Të dishin kohë dini, e mashin të bekunit, të betohën që 3-4 ditë, nuk të regoshin me hangër racionin e bukës.
Policia shkosh në fuqin, shakinin, aty në baqe që ne të shikosh, të gjithë mi kishim shtet dur të telat edhe pastaj i hidhshin kurat, edhe mi dureshin me kapat copën kurë.
Ushimi shumë vjetë, në përkazana, që vini nga Italia me benzin, ma pak shumë, a i si këtë benzin, qëtë, ato janë vetë Uria, dhe me kripa.
Edhe do rreshin në radhë kryetarë. Për sa ka, për sa njerëz ka, me ga vetë, do me atë tashin e vetë, që luftë, aq luftë. Ne ishim 5 vetë, 5 luftë. Kryesorja ka qenë që siguronim vetëm kryp, se e donim të hanin bukën me shumë kryp që të pinim shumë ujë.
Ishin 8 banjë, me 8 qeshme. 1500 familje me 8 banjë, që kush mund të moshte më përpara ujë, kush mund të pinte ujë më përpara, kush mund të bën kërën nevojë më përpara.
Në ato kushte, një të zgjebja.
Kush mund siguroj një 15 lekëshe, siguronim sapunin të tjerat as që mendohin.
Të ndohë, zemë të një gazerën që ishte zbuluar krejta jo. Ne shumë zjerë me la robat, ne shumë zjerë me po në gjerë me hangën. Peshëm tashkat në një kuti, ishëm lecar ka druni. Peshëm një më tjetër, të peshëm sikër, që i verë shumë një në sikër, nëse me i hirë shumë palë, herë mas herë, të i si një palë.
Borri ishte i gjithë minutë.
E gjylet të vogla, të mdhaja, këto të mdhaja, i mershin nga 2 veta, njëni këte njëni atje, këto gjylet edhe si vosin si tur drush.
Një djallë të 10 vjetat, 9 vjetat, pësoj se ka qenë më i madhë, kërkua të të qimente të lujtë, pa në eshën bonë, e ka herë bonë, ba për tjetë dhe pas kritë që njënë, se nësë një të si njerëjaj.
Aty kom pa unë, si një policë, nuk e dinte se shoshmia, të afuste në këpucë, me shqelma, me grushta, po t'i nofte në dru atje, në dru, a i nuk tonë të di. Ata i rrifin gratë të qenë. Në bje rasti një herë, vim nga banjët dhe shkoshim rrugës. Aty që shkullu një tabelë, këshera për toke, nuk e bam neve, që i thonë të mos u afro telave të jo. Na merë të dyve neve, aty e në shonë në birusën që ishte përkatshi oficerit sigurimit. Kur futemi mbrena, një njëri i varë. Kështë varë për dorësh. Dhe këto vetëm sa i cikë shumë këmët. Rënë konte një rëntin shumë të avashtë. Ishte shega frashën.
unde trăiesc vietë për shpatash së unë, në malë Kurani, në politik.
Këtë kohë vdisnin në gazere 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 deri në 6 i kom numëruar unë në ditë. Sidomos fëmijë dhe të moshkuar. E merrnin dhe shonin ke gjashta dhe e qanin natën.
Ishte linë 12.000, të dy binjat ishin 12 punit, të dy kanë dek njëni mas tjetërit. E më kujtohen atë 2.000 tekun, atë boqe kupra, atë boqe të reshkuna.
Dhe unë ngrit edhe shkuli flokët në fillim, pastaj filloi e qeshi.
Dhe nuk kishte arkivor. Atëherë nana prish tjepin tim dhe me atë copa drasësh sa ju.
Arrezën e hapën para portës kampit, aty ishte një shesh, atë një periudhë fare shkutë më shesh. Aty fillon diski dhe një vërdik më mosh me orë këtë.
Ne nuk e dinim se ç'është liria, ç'është shteti, ç'është ashtu, po e dinim se kështu është bota.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, this kind of, just to conclude, about the video is the production of the ISKK, the Institute, and is an artistic reconstruction of the camp of Tepellena with original testimonies of the former camp, of the former Tepellena camp prisoners interviewed in the framework of several projects that the Institute has with former political prisoners. And it's okay, it's a reconstruction, an artistic reconstruction, but based mostly on the testimonies of these people that inhabited this camp, but also on the drawings, as I mentioned before, of the Lek Previsi, who was a young boy living in that camp, and his drawings were used and are used in Albania in reconstructing the camps, the barracks, and the locations of several institutions buildings in the camp. To conclude, I would say that I mean, this kind of proliferation of reaction, controversies surrounding the long debate on communist past and the sites of terror, suffering that I discussed above, activated, as I call, contested memories on the past and on communism in Albania, from the part of the perpetrators, from the part of the victims, and also among scholars dealing with this period. It seems that the polemics on the contested past, and especially on the comparison between evil of one totalitarian regime with another evil regime, are ongoing in Albania. And dealing with the past and the discourse on the communist legacies are very sensitive. And the process of recalling history, revisionism as well, nostalgia, denialism, actually will be part of this discourse that we are living in Albania nowadays. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Enriketa. It's certainly no, well, first of all, thank you for your excellent presentation and talk. Certainly, it's not an easy material to think, watch, go through, especially when people are so attached in Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. It's easy to say that people are not biased, but I certainly was moved, and a lot of things were going through my head while I was watching specifically the video, and I would later on ask my colleague Stephen Siegel, Professor Siegel, has a question regarding that, but I'll open the questions. I'll make one remark. In order to avoid any specific bias, it was clearly visible that the video was supported by Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, which is CSU-CDU related foundation, and it should be known that, of course, they're very interested in dealing with communism and crimes of communism in the past and opening of archives. So we're just making sure that this is put here. However, Enriketa, I would have several, since I'm interested in the nature of the security part of the regimes in Eastern Europe and their legacies, certainly in Bulgaria, but also in comparative perspective. Sigurimi files were opened in 2015, and I was just wondering, I know there was a lot of controversy also, just as elsewhere in former communist countries, as to what part of Sigurimi files been destroyed, hidden, or manipulated. This would be something that is very important because this is the basis of policies of lustration. And since, for instance, I've seen the hotly debated and contentious topic about the entirety of the security files in countries like Bulgaria, and then subsequently drawing inferences and the process of lustration and decommunization. I'll be wondering what would be the situation in Albania. This would be my first question. And the second one that I would like to ask is, I certainly understood the message in your talk about the fruits of the process of lustration in Albania, but are there any further developments ever since 2008 and 15 and onwards, or it just seems to be lingering and being weaponized by ruling and opposition and literally being political football without real results? And of course, real results can come in very different manifestations. I would say that just comparing, I'm looking at our guest Christian, it's either, when you think about removing, communist monuments, anywhere from there to the deconstructing and reconstructing public spaces, all the way to the institutional manifestations. So those are my two opening questions for debate. What is the visibility, and what we're seeing as evidence, and how this process of lustration has taken part. Thank you, Enriketa.
May I reply directly, or I have to collect?
Yes, so we can start, the conversation then. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kirill, for the very insightful question, and very important actually to understand the TJ process, how it's going in Albania actually in 2021. In regard of the related to the Sigurimi files, as I said in the presentation, on 2015 there was this establishment of the authority for the access and the opening of these secret police Sigurimi files, and from 2015 till now, I would say that they were opened some files, but the law that the parliament established for the creation of this institute, for this authority, had some impediments in identifying the perpetrators. I mean, the perpetrators of Sigurimi. And what part of the files being destroyed or held in the Ministry of Interior or in the authority, because the archive of the Ministry of Interior during the communist past is now planned to be located in the authority, in the UK authority.
Transferred.
Yeah, transferred there. But there were some problems, because the former director and actually the director of the archive of the Ministry of Interior, and there is there is a really debate on the preservation of these files in Albania, actually, because during the transportation to the authority archive, many of the files were lost or in somehow, I would not say manipulated because it's too much to say that, but in somehow they were ruined. And the tactics of preservation of these files, according to the director of the Ministry of Archive and Ministry of Interior, is it's not working. Many files are Chelsea, help me. Dëmtuar, are ruined. Let's say.
Si është fjalë?
Dëmtuar, ruined.
Oh, ruined.
Yeah,
ruined. Okay.
But at the beginning, what happened in Albania after the collapse of the fall of the communism is that at the beginning, many files were destroyed. In the 1991, 1992, many files were destroyed, and so we don't know the damage that was done during these years.
Understood. Thank you for addressing this, because it seems that it's in sync with what was going on in different other post-communist environments. That what we call the sanitization. There was a key political question as who would control and would be the gatekeeper of those files, because you would be able to purge or suppress or damage.
Some of the files were used for the opponents, as you said, during the democracy. I mean, to
weaponize
to get rid
political
of
capital.
So these files were very important, but still, I would say that some of them, I mean, a good quality of them is were manipulated. About the further development on TJ, on the illustration process in Albania, I mean, there's a ping pong or a political football, as you said, in Albania. Also, we have, I mean, the Albanian state has undertaken some illustration attempts, especially during the 90s till 1998. There were 2 truth commissions, for example, established. From the establishment of the authority of the opening of the Sigurimi files, there is no recently or serious attempt to do any kind of decommunization, any kind of illustration process in Albania. And for example, about the memoryscape or about the commemoration, for example, interesting is that we still are lacking in Albania to have a date on commemorating the victims of communism. We commemorate the victims of of Stalinism and Nazism, these authoritarian and totalitarian regimes, according to the European resolution on 23rd of August. But all the demands that the association, the representatives of the victims of communism, but also other public figures in Albania are demanding from a lot of years here in Albania, still we don't have a date on commemorating the victims of communism. So this, to me, also there is this kind of lacking of commemorating the victims of communism also on the memoryscape. We still have across all over the country lapidars, the former World War II heroes, commemorating the World War II, as I said, the hot potato, the other hot potato in public discourse in Albania. But not much is done on erasing monuments in honoring the victims of communism. And all the monuments that are erased all over the country in Albania, most of them are erased by the associations, by the NGOs, civil society, or the victims per se. And there is a lack of public institutions in investing and supporting initiatives that commemorate the victims of communism. Also, there is a in Tirana, for example, in 2017, if I'm correct, is opened a museum on the former Sigurimi spies, let's say, so techniques. And this is a new museum in Tirana called the House of Leaves, Shtëpia e Gjeteve, House of Leaves. But still, to me, there is a lack of seriousness in dealing with or recounting the communist past, coming to terms with that.
Understood. Thank you for answering this. And this is fascinating because in our university here, we had students actually looking at comparative remembers models of communism and specifically the museum representation of it and what kind of politics it was looking. So thank you for addressing this. We would like to ask at this point of time, Chelsea, would you like to ask your question, please?
Well, there were two great questions in the comments that I think came up before me, so I don't want to jump ahead. And I think maybe from student, at least one from a student. So we can go to those. But I also just wanted to say, Annie, because I said ruined, but I was thinking not quite ruined, damaged. Yes, that's the word we were looking for. The files were damaged. But yeah, I can wait and we could do the questions in the comments in terms of order.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure the exact order, but I know Natalia Alexion had a question. Natalia, did you want to ask your question?
Well, hi. Thank you so much for this presentation and for the whole series. I'm having a bit of a flu, so I will remain invisible. But as I wrote, I wanted to know a little bit more about the role of people who themselves were prisoners, especially in this camp. And I wonder, you kept on referring to it as a barbed wire camp, and I wonder if this is how it's known, or this is part of the description because it was surrounded by barbed wire. I was just linguistically puzzled. But if you could talk a little bit more about any potential grassroots initiatives, especially in terms of recording family histories. I'm very interested in gender aspect of it. It was touched on in the documentary that you shared with us. And then I'm puzzled by the discussion surrounding the Holocaust. Was it bad enough to compare it to here I actually went forward to Auschwitz. Was it bad enough to call it Auschwitz? Was it not bad enough to call it Auschwitz? I'm just puzzled by how much this reference is central to the discourse of the violence and the crimes committed under communism. But really, anything. This is fascinating, and I'm grateful for your sharing your research with us.
Thank you, Natalie, for these questions, which are really, touch my research. But yeah, about the role of the former prisoners of the camp, and about the Barbed camp. Yes, it was also. Yeah, it is in the official documents. Tepellena is known as a barbed wire camp. That's why this is the official name of Tepellena during the end of the 40s till 1953. And about the prisoners, yeah, there are some. Some of them are really active in their associations. Commemorating, doing events all over the country in commemorating the violence, the human rights violation all over the country. And some of them are part of the authority of the opening of the Sigurimi, of the secret police files, as I say. And some of them are working very much, are really active in giving testimonies, interviews. At the beginning of the 90s, immediately after the collapse of communism, the fall of communism, they were, which is interesting, I found that it's a kind of similar with the Holocaust, what's happening with the Holocaust. Some of the victims were reluctant in giving interviews. The trauma, the suffer was really tremendous. I mean, it was really horrific for them. So, but after the 2000 and especially after 2010, there are a lot, and with the establishment of this institute, ISKK, as I said, they are really engaged in giving interviews or giving some facts or giving materials to be stored in this institute for the future plan to build a museum for the victims, showing their own items in Tepellena, for example. I'm speaking concretely on Tepellena, but there were also other camps, as I show in the map. There were also other camps in Albania and labor force camp, and there were some villages for labor force for the families of deported people. Families of arrested, executed people, or people that I said were escaped Albania. They were deported from cities or where they were lived and put in these villages, deportation villages. So there are some initiatives by individuals to reconstruct, to make a kind of exhibitions or photo exhibitions in the streets of Albania, but still, I would say we are still at the beginning. We are still at the beginning. And what about the gender aspects, which is very interesting for me, for example, there was another debate on Albania recently, 5 or 6 years ago, about the women raped in the camps or in the villages or in the prisons. And nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about that. There is no study touching, researching such sensitive topic.
Right.
On women.
I was wondering in this film, you know, since there were women and there were guards, so yeah.
So there are testimonies. There are some few interviews, mostly of women who live now abroad, not in Albania, who gave some interviews, who wrote on the newspapers about women raped or violence against women in the prisons, in the camps, in the villages, or in the place, in the sites where they were located. But, or during the investigation, for example. But still, the authority, for example, of the opening of security files have shown to the public some files on some women who were investigated or were arrested and put in these prisons. But still, we don't know the names of the perpetrators. I mean, naming and shaming it's lacking in Albania. We speak about perpetrators, but we don't know the names. We know only the names of the Politburo, the people who led Albania during communism, but we don't know the individuals who were directly using violence to the people. So, and this is interesting about the hierarchy between Holocaust. I mean, comparing the Holocaust and the communism, if this is irrelevant, is that is irrelevant or relevant? I mean, this debate on the TVs, on the evening shows in the TVs in Albania, it was, for me, it was shocking. Because I don't understand, I mean, or I don't believe that there is a virus can be, I mean, scaled, I mean, here
right.
In Albania. I mean, you are using violence, you are killing people, you are deporting, you are violating human rights. Being that one person, being that 200, 300, or 6 million. I mean, you are using violence against innocent people or your political enemies. And that's why this debate was really provocative, controversial, and that's why I entitled my presentation Legitimization, because to me, according to me, this is a kind of legitimization of violence with versus delegitimization of violence that we have. Violence is there. So we have to know, we have to acknowledge it. It happened, and we have to seek the truth and to show the truth to the people, especially from the point of research, from the point of view of academics. We can't deny it. That's why delegitimization versus legitimization. I don't know if I reply to your question, Natalie.
I wish we had another hour, but I will not monopolize you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And thank you for opening even more Pandora boxes for conversation.
It's fascinating. I think we're going to move to Chelsea's question next.
Hi, thank you, Annie. I have a lot of questions too, but I also know I could talk with you about this stuff at different times. So I won't take too much time either. I also just wanted to note though too, like Natalia's question, I also have many thoughts about comparisons made and like these ideas of, exceptionalism, right? And so then if something isn't the same as, whatever exception, then it doesn't count, right? So this idea of like, oh, it wasn't Auschwitz, so it's not an issue, right? That comes up so often, right? And same thing with talking about like racial segregation. People might say, well, it's not apartheid, or it wasn't, 19th century United States, so it's, it's not racial segregation, right? So I see that a lot too. My question really, I've been revisiting some like biographies of Enver, and then different styles of writing about trauma. As you said, the kind of the increase in books about trauma and memory of the communist period, and then also thinking about historical records like Elidor Mahili's book, and then thinking about popular biographies like Blendy's book, Blendy Fevziu. And so in kind of rereading those in the last month or so, I've been thinking a lot about just kind of the everyday violence associated with Enver and all the people around him who died, right, who were killed or interned or died, and how explicit people are when they write about it, especially in the last 10, 15 years, and just noting that, yes, all of these people died, or here's this photo from 1948. And then if you go to 1968, only Enver is alive, right? Like all these party members were killed, and in those closest to him. And so how people have not been able to now in present day really reckon with the everyday violence and imprisonment that we can see in the historical record. And I'm wondering to what extent there's some type of still real attachment to like an Albanian pride, or like a government that was for us, by us, so to speak, and something that people really, have really strong sentiments about, and wanting to honor, the communist regime, and because of like its kind of organic Albanian system that overthrew fascists. Like, to what extent are those really strong feelings or sentiments perhaps preventing an engagement with what we know to be like everyday murders that happened at the hands of the regime?
Well, yeah, thank you, Chelsea. Fascinating question and discussion too in this everyday life related to accusing only Enver Hoxha, talking only on him. Also, he died. But I mean, I'm not the one who's to say to you, because you know very well the history of Albania, and you know this patriarchal mentality, this leader's mentality, this attachment to the leader, to the strong man. I can explain it only in this way. I mean, the strong leader, the figure that leads the country, the propaganda that was used during the 45 years of communism in Albania, and this attachment to the leader, to the man, to the main figure, as was Enver Hoxha, is wrapping around the communist also violence, but not only also the way of life in communism, but also the violence. And so naming and shaming lack that we actually we don't have in Albania, maybe direct the people to the leader, to the former leader. Also, as nowadays Albania, I mean, the leader figure is very central to the politics and to everyday life. You know that in the coffee houses, when we drink coffee, when we chat, always we talk on politics, the importance of the politics, the importance of the leadership in the politics. And to me, this is a kind of mentality too. A strong man leading the country, although the country has lots of problems. And I can explain by this point of view. I don't know if
that makes sense. I wrote that in my notes too, kind of the attachment to, the strong man, and kind of how that plays out. And that really connects nicely to the previous discussion about gender too, and just gender and the role it plays in memory, right? Because I also had been reading about women who were raped at the Spotch prison, not even just those in prison, but those who would visit, who would try to
Yes,
visit.
because there were not only men in the spot.
Right,
Yeah,
and right, exactly. So women, right,
Yeah.
so not just, so women around the camps, right, who were raped by guards, for example. So just the role of gender too, and like how we remember and who gets remembered in what ways. So that's a good.
Also the lack of government in considering the violence. People do not relate regard the violence linked to the government, only to Enver Hoxha and to his orders, and people all obey him. As you mentioned, we have several purge in Albania, and every 10 years he purged people out of his leadership family, let's say so. So he is the central figure of the violence, and there is a lack of governance. I mean, he's the one, the party, one man, one party, one people. And this is to me.
Thank you thank you very much, Enriketa and Chelsea, for this really good question where we touched on so many things. And again, it's a heavy conversation, you know, that we need to think through. Nothing cheerful here, but very important. So I would ask Keith to address his question. Keith?
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandelejmoni. I'm wondering about this 2016 survey you talked about, and you're bringing up or you brought up the amnesia among younger generations. So just how that enters into conversation with what the ISKK is doing, whether their initiatives aim to educate younger people, and if you talked about a lot of like unwillingness to learn about the communist past, if then people are trying to just directly insert this into the education system just so you have to learn about it, or if the ISKK is doing something separate from that.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah. What ISKK made and is struggling actually is to interview as many as possible or to gather testimonies from the people who were imprisoned or were in the camps or in these deportation labor camps and villages. But still, the publications of this institute, there is, if I'm correct, there are 7 or 8 volumes with testimonies of these people, but still, due to this lack of history of communism and memory of communism in the school textbooks, due to the few hours that are in the disposal of discussing or learning about communism in the school textbook or in the school curricula, people, I mean, the young generation, pupils, learners cannot learn in details what happened. There are some scarcely, mostly political information on communism, but there is a kind of, I would say, unwillingness also to educate people on communism. If it's made purposely, if it's politically motivated, there are lots of debates in here. Left-wing politicians and right-wing politicians are accusing each other, doing much or less on dealing with the past, on coming to terms with the past in Albania. But still, ISKK, with these documentaries and with its publication, and there is, for example, another publication in collaboration with CAS, Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Albania, publish a children's book on kids books on main figures killed, executed, or anti-communist or victims of communism in Albania, as a kind of educating kids with communists. For example, the first book was on one woman. It was Sabiha Kasimati, the first biologist, female in Albania, Sabiha Kasimati, who was originated from Gjirokastra, the town where Enver Hoxha also was born, a compatriot of Enver Hoxha, a schoolmate of Enver Hoxha, and she was killed. Her name was put by Enver Hoxha in the list for execution with other 21 intellectuals that were killed in 1941. So there is this attempt to publish such books for kids to use in the schools to know more about. But still, to me, it's not enough.
Thank you very much.
ISKK organize also talks in the school, monthly talks in the schools to talk about communism and to talk about the victims.
Thank you, Enriketa, and thank you, Keith, for this outreach. We have time for only one last question and a short answer, if possible, because we're running out of time, but I know that somebody's been waiting for a while, and this is Christian from Sofia. Christian?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a historian and archivist from Bulgaria, so I have a lot of comments and a lot of questions, but I have to be quick. So you mentioned that more than 50% of the Albanians have a positive attitude to communist past. I think that the situation is very similar to the current situation in Bulgaria. But my question is, does this positive attitude have a potential to become, how to say, a real problem? Do you have a very strong and powerful Communist Party in Albania? And probably you get my question. Is that positive attitude, after all, have potential to become real problem?
Yeah, thank you, Christian, for your question. And in the survey that I mentioned, actually 42% has this positive attitude toward communism. But still, 42 for me is a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and about the positive attitude, if it's a problem for nowadays, actually it's also a political problem. What is happening in Albania is that when the left-wing party comes to power, and the left wing, it was the former Labour Party of Albania, the former Communist Party in Albania, there is always this kind of nostalgic demonstration in the streets. In every, I mean, official public holidays, related to communism or related to the war, Second World War, there is always this kind of demonstration in the streets of Tirana, or when there is a Liberation Day of Tirana, and there is another problem with the Liberation date. Chelsea knows better, and about the controversies and the polarization of the society. There is always this demonstration. So the politics also till now, all what the left-wing party has made is a kind of engaging, activating the left, the nostalgic, the veterans of the war, especially the former Communist Party members. And the Communist Party, for example, in Albania is legal. And all the kind of people, the nostalgic, the members of this party are walking around and demonstrating the Enver Hoxha, and because the symbols of communism are not abolished in Tirana, in Albania.
Yeah, they're not banned.
They are allowed to show their symbols in the streets. Although the victims and the association are demanding this to be, to outlaw the symbols of communism in Albania. Till now we don't have it. All that we have done, or the Parliament of Albania has done, is a resolution to condemn the Enver Hoxha and the Politburo communism in general, but not the symbols of communism. There were some attempts to establish some lustration, as I mentioned, truth commissions, lustration, compensation schemes were also implemented. Still problematic. Some people are getting money, some did not, but still, when the politics comes in or is involved in this dividing the society, it's a problematic.
Well, we're really out of time today, but I just want to thank you so much, Enriketa, for this really amazing talk. It was a lot of powerful questions came up today, and I think we had a really great conversation. And thank you for sharing that video with us. I'm wondering if there's a link to that so that we can.
There is a YouTube. there is a YouTube link, and I will
Okay.
send it with email. And yeah, thank you for inviting
Thank you.
me, and you all for listening to me. And I'm really delighted to be with you. And this is a good opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to talk with you, to know you also online. But thank you very much. It was really fantastic.
Thank
You're
you very
welcome,
much
and
for
thank you everyone for
participating
coming.
Thank you for coming.